Not everybody who loves you is good for you, and not everybody who's kin to you deserves a seat at your table. My name is Willowdean Fontaine, and I am 90 years old. I have buried 2 husbands, 1 sister, and more friends than I have fingers and toes to count on. And in 90 years, I have learned exactly one thing that nobody wants to say out loud on the television. I'm going to tell you about 7 people, and every single one of them taught me something. It took me 80 years to learn the easy way, and one of them taught me the hard way, which nearly cost me everything. Stay with me to the end, because the last one isn't who you think it is. And I promise you, by the time I'm done, you'll be thinking of somebody in your own life. Maybe somebody you already let go. Maybe somebody you haven't let go of yet. The one who only calls in a crisis. There was a nephew of mine who I hadn't heard a word from in 3 years. Not a birthday card, not a phone call at Christmas. Then my husband Otha passed, and wouldn't you know it, he called me the very week the will was being read. He cried real tears at that funeral. I want you to know that. I'm not saying they were fake. But grief has a strange way of arriving right on schedule when there's an inheritance involved, and I've buried enough people to know the difference between a man who's sad and a man who's calculating. He asked me, gentle as you please, if I'd thought about keeping things simple and just signing the house over to him early to avoid all that legal mess later. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called my lawyer the next morning because 89 years old does not mean stupid. Here's the truth about the ones who only call in a crisis. They are not checking on you. They are checking on your assets. And the tell is always the same. They show up with sympathy in one hand and a request in the other, and the request comes faster than the sympathy fades. The friend who competes with your grief. My friend Delphine, God rest her, we buried plenty of arguments together over 60 years, had a habit that took me a long while to name. Every time I lost somebody, she'd lost somebody worse. Every time I was sick, she'd been sicker. I told her once my hip was aching something terrible, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, Willie, you don't know pain until you've had my hip. Now I love Delphine, but a friend who cannot let you have your own sorrow, who has to climb on top of your bad news and plant a flag on it, that is not comfort. That is competition wearing comfort's clothes. And loneliness does something dangerous to old women especially. It makes us grateful for any company at all, even company that leaves us feeling smaller every time we leave it. You are allowed to want a friend who can simply say, that sounds hard, without turning it into a contest. The doctor who stopped listening the day you turned 70. I sat in front of a young doctor once, couldn't have been 30 years old, and I told him my chest had been tight for 2 weeks. He looked at my chart, looked at my age, and said, well, Mrs. Fontaine, that's pretty normal at your stage of life. I want you to hear that phrase again, at your stage of life, as if my heart had signed some kind of contract to stop mattering the day I turned 70. I did not argue with him in that office. I was raised to be polite to doctors, God help me. But I went home and I called my daughter and I told her what he'd said, and she marched me straight to another doctor who actually put a stethoscope where his ears should have been listening in the first place. Turned out I needed a small procedure that man would have let slide right past him. Here is what I want every one of you watching to understand. Your body does not stop being worth investigating just because it has more birthdays behind it than ahead. If a doctor's first response to your pain is your age instead of your symptoms, that doctor has stopped doing his job, and you are allowed, no, you are required to find one who hasn't. This isn't permission to skip your medicine or ignore something serious. It's permission to demand to be heard. The neighbor who trades in your business. There was a woman 2 doors down, sweet as pie to my face, who I found out was telling half the block that my son didn't visit because we didn't get along, when the truth was he was working 2 jobs to keep his own children fed. She wasn't cruel exactly. She was just hungry. Hungry for something to talk about, and my life was handy. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that a person who brings you gossip about everybody else is, by simple arithmetic, a person who is carrying your business to everybody else too. The friendliest mouth in the neighborhood is very often the leakiest one. The one who uses your loneliness like a leash. Now here's the one I promised you. I said family, and I meant it, but I want to be careful with you here, because I have seen this lesson twisted into something cruel. I've heard someone tell a friend to cut off her whole family, every child, every grandchild, over one hurt feeling. I wouldn't tell you to do that. I raised 4 children, and I would rather lose a fight with every one of them than lose a single one of them for good. What I am talking about is narrower and more dangerous than that. It is a particular kind of person. Sometimes it is family, sometimes it wears family's face, who figures out that you are lonely, and instead of easing that loneliness, they use it. They make themselves your only visitor, and then, slowly, they make themselves your only option. They discourage the other calls. They forget to pass along the invitations. They tell you your other children don't care, so that you'll stop reaching for them and reach only for the hand in front of you, the hand that sooner or later starts asking about the checking account. My own sister Ruthie went through this with a son-in-law who moved into her spare room just until he got back on his feet, and within a year he'd become the only person she saw, and her other grandchildren had somehow all stopped wanting to visit, except they hadn't stopped wanting to. They'd stopped being told about visits at all. It took her whole church showing up unannounced on her 90th birthday to break through it. The people worth keeping close, family or otherwise, want you to have more love in your life, not less. If somebody's affection only seems to grow the smaller your world gets, that is not love keeping you company. That is love keeping you captive. The old flame who comes back with a story. I was 74 years old when a man I'd loved at 21 showed up at my church, silver-haired and smiling, telling me the years had never dimmed how he felt. Lord, it was flattering. I won't pretend it wasn't. It took him about 6 weeks to bring up the small business opportunity he was 3 months behind on payments for. I am not telling you love can't find you again at 70, at 80, at 90. I believe it can, truly. I am telling you that romance is the oldest disguise there is, and a heart that's been alone a long while will forgive almost anything for the feeling of being chosen again. Let yourself be flattered. Just don't let yourself be emptied. The person you haven't named yet, because she's you. I told you the last one wasn't who you'd think. It isn't a nephew or a neighbor or an old flame. It's the version of yourself that talks you out of your own worth. The voice that says you're a burden for needing help. The voice that says you should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you get, because who else wants an old woman's company anyway? The voice that keeps you quiet when a doctor dismisses you, keeps you generous when a relative takes advantage, keeps you company with people who empty you out, because some company felt like the only thing you were still allowed to want. That voice is the one you have to avoid the hardest, because every other person on this list can only take what that voice hands them. And it took me 80 of those years to learn that my time, my money, and my company were not owed to anyone simply because they asked nicely. You are allowed to close the door, gently or otherwise, on anyone, kin or stranger, who makes you smaller for the privilege of their presence. If somebody on this list sounded like somebody in your life, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it does an old woman's heart good to know who's out there. And if this reached you the way I hope it did, send it to somebody who needs to hear that they're allowed to choose better company at any age. I've buried a lot of people I loved. I don't intend to bury any more of myself for people who never deserved the space.